Alan Scott, The Green Lantern #1, is the first chapter of a story that, frankly, has been a long time coming. Much like the Wesley Dodds' The Sandman title that made its debut a couple of weeks ago, this book is going to take us back to the 1940s and show us what Alan Scott's life was like during the war as the original Green Lantern. But unlike the Wesley Dodds book, this book will show us Alan Scott living as a gay man and what that's like for him. This whole retcon of Alan Scott being a gay man was originally started in 2012 when an alternate universe version of Alan Scott was revealed to be gay, and that paved the way for the canonical Alan Scott being made into a gay man. As such, why it took so long for us to get a story about Alan Scott living as a gay man in the 40s is a little bit of a mystery to me, as it seems kind of obvious. But I'm hoping it was just a matter of finding the right story with the right team at the right place at the right time, which it feels like they've done here. It feels like this Alan Scott The Green Lantern book is going to be something special. This book also reveals to us an unseen wrinkle in Alan Scott's dynamic with the Justice Society of America early on, as well as what his dynamic was like with J. Edgar Hoover. It wasn't good, folks. I wouldn't call Alan Scott The Green Lantern #1 a feel-good comic book per se, but it does feel good to have this kind of queer visibility in mainstream superhero comic books. So if that's your thing, I highly recommend this issue.
Alan Scott, The Green Lantern #2 is the kind of superhero comic that makes you think, which is a good thing. But in this case, it's also kind of unsettling. Or at least it's unsettling if you care about people. In this issue, we flash back to the late 30s, where we see that Alan Scott has checked himself into Arkham Asylum to treat his homosexuality. Once there, he's checked into a deviant wing, where we get a small glimpse of what happens to queer individuals in this facility in the name of treatment. This book really gave me pause and prompted me to think about the fact that this is how queer people were treated in this country openly not that long ago, really. If you want to go down the rabbit hole even further, how many queer people are still treated this way, not just in this country on perhaps a little bit more of a discrete basis, but around the world? To what extent is this kind of thing still going on? Yeah, I've become pretty heavily invested in this Alan Scott The Green Lantern book pretty quickly. I mean, it's only been 2 issues. It feels like this story is saying something important, and I hope that people are listening.
We're talking today about seeing a softer side of God's spirit of vengeance, the Spectre, in Alan Scott The Green Lantern #3. Alan Scott teams up with not only the Spectre, Jim Corrigan, but the Flash, Jay Garrick, in this issue, and we see that they are both definitively LGBTQIA+ allies, even though that term most definitely did not exist in the 1940s. Naturally, with the Spectre being here, we dive into the more spiritual dimension of Alan Scott's homosexuality, and homosexuality in general, and we get a really touching conversation between Alan Scott and Jim Corrigan.
This is the second issue to come out in less than 2 weeks, the other one being Wonder Woman #4, which was released last week, to talk about homosexuality and religion and spirituality. And I like that. I like it a lot, actually. It's a place that superhero stories don't normally go.
Actually makes me feel like DC is becoming a more mindful, inclusive place for queer readers. Which isn't to say that it was not mindful or inclusive before, but we haven't seen content like this in a long time, if ever.
We learn the horrifying, and in our hero's case, heartbreaking, origin story of the Red Lantern in Alan Scott The Green Lantern #4. So remember that at this point on the DC Comics timeline, Alan Scott is the only Green Lantern on Earth. It was a simpler time. Nonetheless, this book makes a point to incorporate elements from the multicolored emotional spectrum, which was established as part of the Hal Jordan Green Lantern Corps mythos in, I believe, the late 2000s, early 2010s. It's nice to have that connective tissue there, even though I don't think our author Tim Sheridan or anyone involved with this book actually originated it. The best thing that this book has going for it, at least as far as I'm concerned, is the connection that it's made between its main characters and its audience. Full disclosure, I'm a straight cisgendered man. So there are struggles and elements that come with being queer and being a part of that LGBTQI+ community that, even though I consider myself an ally, I'm really never going to understand on an intimate level. But what I really appreciate about this book is that it kind of takes you there. I can't identify with what it's like to be queer, but I can identify with what it's like to look at yourself and ask, is there something wrong with me? There's something different about me. Do I need to change that? Do I need to do something to fit in better with the world around me? And that's a powerful sentiment and a powerful connection to make with your audience. And it's really what makes this Alan Scott book memorable, at least to me. Body language is an important thing in the world of comic books. Pay attention to the body language between Alan Scott and the Red Lantern in this issue, particularly during the more quiet, I guess, intimate moment that we see. It's compelling. Alan Scott, the Green Lantern number 5, continues to balance epic and emotion. Quick cheap plug, have you guys seen the interview I did with the author of this issue, Tim Sheridan? You know what the great thing about that interview was? It's just two handsome dudes talking comics while their action figures look on from the background. No, seriously, I had a lot of fun. Check it out. So I've pretty consistently been complimentary of the writing on this book, but one team that I want to make sure gets its flowers, so to speak, is the artistic team, that being pencilers Cian, Tormey, and our colorist Matt Herms, who works with Hi-Fi on this issue. I meant what I said in the beginning about this story combining the epic and the emotional. Some artists are really good at one, other artists are really good at the other, but Tormey and the artistic team on this book can really pull off both, and that complements Tim Sheridan's script really well. We get some more information on this book about how Alan's powers connect to the Guardians of the Universe and the more cosmic Green Lantern stuff. Ultimately, that's not necessary, but it's still cool information to have. This issue reminded me of something. Do you guys know who co-created Alan Scott, the original Green Lantern? Bill Finger, the man who also co-created Batman. Actually, if you believe a lot of the insiders and the people who are in the know about that sort of thing, Bill Finger did most of the creating when it came to Batman, but that's another video entirely. We've still got one more issue to go of Alan Scott, the Green Lantern, but at this point I think we can safely say that this book overachieved and gave us more than at least I was expecting. This book, as well as the Wesley Dodds Sandman book, really made me want to see DC explore World War II era 1940s history a little bit more. Heck, go beyond the war, go into McCarthyism and how that affected superheroes of that era. You know, sometimes learning about history can be fun. What a concept. Alan Scott, the Green Lantern number 6 is the final issue of the miniseries, and I got some things to say, folks. So strap in for a couple minutes. David Talaski has been our cover artist for this miniseries, and the cover he does for this issue might be my favorite one he's done, just because it's got that romantic element, but it's also combative, which is not always a combination you're looking for in your fiction, much less your real life, but he pulls it off nicely and appropriately here. In terms of story, things kind of end the way you think they're going to end, at least in a broad sense. I mean, this was never going to wrap up with Alan Scott being hit by a bus, so no big surprises, which is okay. I don't think we were necessarily looking for surprises here. I do like, though, that in the middle of the big battle sequence that opens the issue, Alan is trying to get his ring to do something, and of course it's powered by his will. So he just says, come on, come on, come on, will. You know that if people had Green Lantern rings in the real world, that's how they talk to them. Work, damn it, work. So to kind of put a bow on this miniseries, Alan Scott the Green Lantern really accomplishes two big things, one of which being supremely more monumental than the other. So I'm going to start with the small one. I would argue that this book really revitalized the Alan Scott character for the first time since ever. Up to this point in time, we as readers had been educated about the fact that this character was important from a historical context, but that's about it. Yes, he was in the Justice Society books, but he was more a relic from the past. Somebody that readers could point at and say, hey, he's that guy from back when. Exploring this relatively new dimension of Alan Scott as a gay man, this book teaches us that the character can indeed be interesting and in fact relevant in the 21st century, which is saying something considering he was created way back in 1940. Much more importantly though, Alan Scott the Green Lantern offers non-queer people like myself an all too valuable window of insight into what it's like for a great deal of people in this world to be queer and to be part of that LGBTQIA+ community. We see Alan Scott and other characters struggle with their sexuality and struggle with the world's reaction to their sexuality. And we follow them, and more importantly, we feel for them. In a genre and an industry where we're so often focused on superpowers and heroics, that's something that's truly powerful and heroic. And that's something that everybody involved with this book can hang their hat on and be proud of forever. I'm not getting paid or getting any kind of fringe benefits to say that. I just think that Alan Scott the Green Lantern is a tremendous piece of art and a tremendous piece of business. And I really think more people should be taking a look at it. My wife's actually going to read this book once the collected edition comes out in September. She doesn't know that yet. She's probably learning about it by watching this, but she's going to read it. And I think you should too.